Hi, welcome to the first episode of the Movement Notes podcast. My name is Olia, I'm your host, and I'm the owner of Pilates on George, a boutique studio in Sydney CBD. I also run an Instagram page called Pilates on George, and I've been teaching movement and educating instructors for over 16 years. I want to be clear about who this podcast is for upfront, because I think that saves everyone time. This is not a podcast for beginners looking for workout tips. This is for people who work with bodies professionally, people like Pilates instructors, movement educators, physiotherapists, anyone who teaches or coaches in a studio setup, who want to think more clearly about what they're actually doing and why they're actually doing what they're doing. I'm going to try to say things that don't get said enough in this industry. Some of it will be uncomfortable. None of it is actually personal, and all of it is aimed at making us better at our jobs, which ultimately means better outcomes for the people we work with. Today's episode is about the language we use with our clients. We will discuss if we are actually building autonomy, or we're making our clients dependent on us, so they return again and again. Specifically, what the industry's obsession with alignment and overcorrection is actually doing to clients, and why I think it's one of the most important things we need to talk about. Let's get into it. I will start with a small personal story. A couple of months ago, I got a hip labrum tear, and it's not a dramatic injury. It happened the way a lot of things happen in bodies that have been working for a long time. I just turned 40 last week, so it's injury that is gradually built. So in my case, there was actually a trigger, but it's not what created an injury in the first place. Anyway, one day it was just there, and I went through the process that many of my clients go through. I saw practitioners, I was assessed, I had an MRI, I had an X-ray, I had conversations with people whose job was to help me to understand what is happening in my body and what can I do about it. And almost every single one of them, pretty much without exception, led with limitations. Here's what you shouldn't do. Here's the range you have to avoid. Here's what we need to protect. Here's the list of movements that are off the table for now. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying any of this was wrong or inappropriate. And some of these things are actually makes total sense. A hip labrum tear does require some care. They're genuine things worth being thoughtful about and considerate. But here's what I noticed. Nobody asked me first what I could do. Nobody asked me what I wanted to explore. Nobody started the conversation with me to tell me what's still working and what I am willing to try. I told multiple practitioners, I am an experienced mover, I exercise regularly, I understand my body reasonably well, and I'm happy to modify, but I want to understand this, not just given a restriction list. And the conversation still defaulted pretty much every time to the catalog of those restrictions. On a side note, I have a specific advantage in that situation. I know a lot about movement, I know a lot about my body, and I don't catastrophize the injury. I didn't stop moving, but the pattern I observed matters because most clients don't have that background in movement like I do. The client walk out from the practitioner with a list of things their body can't do, and that list becomes how they understand themselves. And it's not a small thing. That's the story they'll tell about their body for years. And when I looked around at how Pilates specifically talks to clients and how we train instructors to assess and communicate, I realized this actually wasn't a healthcare communication problem. It is like a built-in feature of how our industry operates. This is what this episode is about. Let me paint a picture of what I mean when I talk about alignment-obsessed and fear-based teaching, because I want to be specific rather than abstract. You are a Pilates instructor, a new client walks in, you do an initial assessment or initial consultation, and here's what most training programs have prepared you to do. Find things that are off. Anterior pelvic tilt, excessive thoracic kyphosis, one shoulder sitting higher than another, asymmetrical rib positioning, tight hip flexors, inhibited glutes, the left hip sitting differently than the right. You've been trained to see all of this, and you've been trained to treat it as if it's the problem, as the thing your sessions are going to address going forward. Now, here's the question I want you to sit with. How many of those findings are actually relevant to why this client is in front of you? How many of them are actually causing their symptoms or limiting their function or going to change how you program your program for them? Because asymmetrical hips are present in a huge portion of the adult population. An anterior pelvic tilt is not inherently pathological. A higher shoulder might be a habit, a historical adaptation, just a body in front of you. And if you spend the first session pointing all of that out, even gently, even with good intentions, you have just told this person a story about their body that goes something like, there are a lot of things wrong with you, and I'm going to spend our time together fixing them. And then you start cueing. Engage your core, find neutral, lengthen through your spine, don't let that pelvis tip, keep the ribs down. What does a client hear when they get that stream of correction every session? What they hear is, I can't trust my body to move without supervision. I need someone to tell me what it's doing at all times. Without you, I'll get it wrong. And that's not an empowering of the client. This builds the dependent client who will be scared to move on their own, who will be scared to go to the gym by themselves and lift a dumbbell heavier than 2 kilos. And I want to be fair here. I don't think most instructors are doing it with bad intention. I certainly didn't. I think we're doing exactly what we were trained to do. We were given a vocabulary, neutral pelvis, replacement, scapula setting, and we were told that applying it correctly is what good teaching looks like. But good teaching is not about applying a vocabulary. It's about producing an outcome. And the outcome that we want is a person who moves better, who feels more capable, who understands their body, who moves with more confidence and less fear when they initially started. Alignment-focused teaching in its current dominant form is not consistently producing that outcome. And the research backs that up, which I'll come to in a moment. I want to say something here that I think is important and that most of the people in this industry will not say out loud. A client who behaves and who believes like their body is broken and needs constant management will book consistently. They will show up reliably. They will feel that they cannot stop coming because if they do, their body will fall apart. A client, though, who feels genuinely capable, who has gotten stronger, more confident, more autonomous in how they move, might not need you as often. They might come once a fortnight instead of twice a week. They might take a break and come back when something new comes up or when they have a flare-up. They don't need the session in the same way as before. And I'm not saying the Pilates industry consciously created this dynamic. I'm not saying instructors are deliberately keeping clients dependent to protect their income. I generally don't believe that's what's happening in most cases. But what I'm saying is that the system, the way education is structured, the way sessions are framed, the language that we use in those sessions, accidentally produces this dynamic as a byproduct. And I think we owe it to ourselves and to our clients to be quite honest about that. The model that makes clients feel slightly broken, slightly in need of correction, slightly reliant on the expert to keep things from falling apart, that model is actually financially stable. The model that builds genuine capability and autonomy might require more thought about how you structure your business. That tension is quite real, and I'm saying this as a business owner. And I think it explains more about why the industry clings to alignment-obsessed language that most people are comfortable admitting. The best instructors I know, the ones who genuinely get incredible long-term results, are the ones who are actively building their clients towards independence. Those instructors also tend to have the longest retention, the strongest referrals, because the experience of actually getting better is what people tell their friends about. But it requires a fundamentally different frame than, here's what's wrong with your body and here's how we're gonna fix it. I want to spend a few minutes on research because the evidence that actually exists on this quite strong and quite consistent, even if it hasn't fully made its way into mainstream Pilates education. The first body of research that I would like to mention is on what's called the Nocebo effect. Now, you probably heard or familiar with the placebo effect, which is the measurable benefit that comes from positive expectation. The nocebo is the opposite. It's the measurable harm that comes from negative expectation and specifically from negative clinical communication. There is this landmark paper by Colloca and Miller that was published in 2012 that looks specifically at how clinician communication shapes patients' outcomes. What they found was not really subtle, like quite big. The language practitioners use doesn't just inform patients, it changes how patients experience their bodies. Negative framing, telling people what they can't do, highlighting what's wrong, using language that implies fragility or damage produces measurably worse outcomes and higher pain levels. It produces more avoidance behavior, slower recovery. It produces more anxiety about movement. And this mechanism is not really mysterious. When you tell someone their pelvis is tilted and their glutes are switched off, that their ribs are flared, or their spine is at risk if they don't maintain this specific alignment, you are not giving them actually useful information. You are giving their nervous system a threat narrative. And the nervous system responds to threat narratives by becoming more sensitized, more guarded, more pain-producing. The second body of research I want to mention is the Fear-Avoidance model, which was developed by Vlaeyen and Linton and published in a journal called Pain in 2000. The Fear-Avoidance model describes something we see in studios all the time, even if we don't always name it. When a person with pain or injury is given information that frames their body as fragile or their movement as risky, a significant proportion of them will begin to avoid movement. Not because avoiding really helps that, it actually makes things worse, but because the fear response is strong enough to override what the body actually needs, which is progressive appropriate loading. The research is very, very clear on that. Pain-related fear and movement avoidance in many cases are more disabling than their original injury. We are creating the disability by how we talk about the body. I will post all the research references and links in the description to this podcast if you want to read more. And I want to be careful here. I'm not saying ignore pain or ignore pathology, ignore things that genuinely need attention. A hip labrum, like in my case, a hip labrum tear, like in my case, does need care. Some loading patterns generally need modification, like I can't squat to the full range. But the nuance matters enormously. There is a vast difference between here's how we'll manage this thoughtfully and here is a list of things your body can't do. One of those conversations builds capacity and capability and independence, and the other builds fear. There is also a growing body of research on capability-focused rehabilitation. The outcomes that come from starting a clinical conversation with what the person can do, what is working, what they want to build towards, consistently. This produces better adherence, better outcomes, and better long-term client relationship. So it isn't just an ethical question about how we talk to people. It's an effectiveness question. How can we make the session more effective? The capability-first approach gets better results, full stop. Okay, so I spent most of this episode describing the problem, and I want to spend this last section being actually practical, because if I don't, this is a very long complaint about my hip labrum tear. What does it actually look like to do things differently? I want to start by saying it doesn't mean abandoning assessments. It doesn't mean ignoring the findings. It doesn't mean pretending that asymmetries or compensations and load tolerance don't matter. They do. The question is what you do with that information and how you talk about it. The shift I've made in my own practice, and that is how I teach in my courses and my clients as well, comes down to 4 questions. Question 1, what does this person need to be able to do? And I'm asking this not in a Pilates sense, in a life sense. What does their body or what does their day actually look like? What are they finding hard? What are they afraid of? What do they want to do? a few months from now. That question completely changed my approach. I stopped chasing things to correct because I had a specific and meaningful goal to work towards. Every choice we make in the studio together with my client, because it's a collaborative work, not a one-way road. So every choice we make together, what to load, what to progress, what to modify, is being made in service of that goal. We don't have an overarching goal of tidying up the body's apparent imperfections. Question 2. What can the client do already? What's already working for them? What's the client is doing well and actually is enjoying? I ask this not because I am going to ignore the rest, but because starting from strength rather than deficit of strength changes how the client feels and affects confidence of movement, which we discussed prior and is based on research. There's something that happens neurologically when a person is shown that they are capable of before they're shown what they are not capable of. The nervous system is not constantly on alert, and as a result, movement gets better. The brain doesn't scream, stop, 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 every time the client is doing an exercise. So we have time to adjust, to explore, to build the capacity to movement. And it's not magic, it's exactly what the research on positive expectation describes. Question 3. What do we need to do to see the progress over the next, say, 6 sessions? The number can be different. Not what are we fixing, but what are we changing? Language matters here. We want to create a measurable progress on the 1 or 2 things that are actually relevant to why this person is in the studio in the first place. Question 4. How will I know that it's working? Because if I can't answer that, I don't have a program. I have a series of exercises, and that's a big difference. Now then, let's talk about the cueing. I'm not saying throw away all your cues. What I'm saying is to be very clear about what you're cueing and why. Engage your core is actually not a cue. It's a phrase that sounds like a cue. It gives the client something to do. It makes the session feel active and technical. But in the absence of specificity, most clients have almost no idea what it actually means. Does it mean second my belly? And more importantly, it puts the focus on monitoring and managing rather than building independence. A cue that builds strength and awareness sounds slightly different and a little bit longer. You can ask, can you feel the weight shifting into your left heel as you, for example, lower in the squat? Or I want you to notice what happens with your hip if you add this much load. Or let's see how far you can go before you feel the exercise doesn't feel right. Those cues put the client in the driver's seat. They build proprioception, confidence, and genuine body knowledge. They're not creating dependence on your voice to maintain the correct position. Making this shift in practice for you as an instructor will not happen instantly. It requires a learning of some deeply ingrained patterns. It can feel like you're not doing enough because you've been trained to see correction as the value you provide. But the value is not the correction. The value is the result. And the outcome or the result of capable, confident, autonomous movement is one of the most meaningful things that we can actually provide to the client. The clients who have been with me the longest are not the ones who feel like they can't manage without me. I'm sure they can run a session themselves. They're the ones who show up because they're genuinely getting somewhere and they know it. That's the practice I want to be running. And I think it's the practice most of us got into this education or trading for. All right, guys, that's it for episode 1. If I had to give you one thing to take away from this conversation, it would be this. The next time you are with a client or the next time you are teaching as an instructor, ask yourself what story this session is telling about that person's body. Is it telling them that they have a lot of things that need fixing and they need you to fix them? Or is it telling them that they are capable, they're making progress, and they understand themselves better than they did before? That question is worth you to sit with. I'm going to be doing this episodes very regularly. Topics will mostly sit in this kind of territory: the clinical reasoning behind teaching decisions, the research that does and doesn't support what the industry says, and the honest conversations about what it actually takes to get good long-term outcomes for clients and a sustainable practice as an instructor. If this is resonating with you, the best thing that you can do is subscribe to my podcast or to my Instagram, Pilates on George, and share this episode with the instructor that you respect and who you think would find it useful. I also write a weekly newsletter on this exact kind of material. It's absolutely free. It goes a little bit deeper than Instagram, and it's for people who want a clearer thinking rather than just more content. Link is in the show notes. Thank you for listening to the first one. I'm committed to 10 episodes, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.